The day the relationship ended felt like a storm that had been waiting to break. For months, tension filled the walls like pressure building behind a dam. Every silent dinner, every slammed door, every moment spent pretending things were normal added weight until the final moment arrived. And when it came, it arrived with the worst kind of betrayal violence. It shattered the last fragile thread holding the relationship together. When the dust settled, there was no apology, no explanation, no tears. There was only a hollow numbness that spread through her body like ice. The house no longer felt like a home. It felt like a cage that she had finally found the strength to escape. Every room carried memories that cut deeper than words could describe, and the air felt thick with everything she wanted to forget. Leaving was not a choice, it was survival. She packed with shaking hands, her heartbeat echoing in her ears like distant thunder. The belongings she once cared for so carefully were shoved into boxes without order. Nothing mattered anymore except getting out before anything worse happened. The home they had built together over years suddenly seemed unfamiliar, like she was walking through a stranger's life. Hallways that once heard laughter now felt haunted. The kitchen where they celebrated anniversaries and holidays looked like a stage where something terrible had just taken place. Even the silence felt heavy and dangerous. He watched from a distance, leaning in the doorway, expression unreadable. He said nothing, and she did not look directly at him again. The shared life they once planned disappeared like smoke. He owned the house, so there was no argument about who stayed and who left. Packing up their shared life took hours, though it felt like days. Clothing, books, photo frames she couldn't bear to open, all swallowed into cardboard. Every object seemed to carry both weight and poison. Outside, the sunlight looked too bright, as if the world refused to match the darkness she carried. And then she saw the garden, her garden. It was the one corner of the property that had been hers entirely. She had built those garden beds plank by plank, moving heavy soil with aching arms, spending weekends pruning and planting. It had been her piece when everything else felt chaotic. Flowers she carefully selected and nurtured bloomed there in vibrant colors, turning the dull yard into something alive. She remembered every purchase, every blister, every proud moment when neighbors stopped and admired the transformation. The flowers were expensive and they were hers. She told him she planned to take them with her, and he agreed without protest. For once, there was no fight, no argument, no attempt to control. It was the only thing he ever let go of easily. She dug them out one by one, placing each gently into pots. The roots came up cleanly, the soil falling away in soft clumps. When she was finished, the garden beds were empty, nothing left but freshly turned earth and the quiet whisper of what used to grow there. Standing at the edge of the cleared beds, she felt a strange stillness. The soil looked raw and exposed, smooth and quiet, waiting for whatever would come next. It felt like looking at her life from the outside, stripped bare, uncertain, but full of possibility. She closed the gate behind her for the last time, not knowing that the space she left behind would soon become the beginning of something no one could have predicted. At the garden center, she was trying to stay focused on the practical task of buying large pots to move the flowers she had worked so hard to raise. Her mind was foggy, the kind of haze that follows days of emotional chaos. She pushed the cart slowly, barely noticing the music playing overhead or the cheerful voices of weekend gardeners around her. Her hands were still shaky. Her throat still felt tight. Even the sunlight filtering through the greenhouse glass seemed too bright to look at directly. She found the section with gardening supplies and selected sturdy containers, lifting them one by one into the cart. They were heavy, but physical effort felt better than thinking. She tried to shake off the lingering sense of defeat that clung to her, but every quiet moment threatened to pull memories back to the surface. Standing there between rows of seed packets and fertilizer bags, exhaustion washed over her so completely that she had to steady herself against the cart. That was when her eyes landed on a bright packet hanging near the end of the row. Catnip, a picture of soft green leaves, covered the front, surrounded by playful drawings of cats rolling in the grass. It was oddly cheerful for something so small and simple. She paused, studying it. She remembered someone once saying catnip was hard to grow, almost impossible. Most attempts, they said, barely sprouted. It was more of a novelty than a real plant, something people tried for fun without expecting success. The thought came quickly and quietly, almost like a whisper, a harmless idea born from months of pain and pressure. Just a tiny spark. The garden beds she had emptied were now bare soil, perfectly smooth, waiting for something to fill them. If a few lonely catnip plants managed to sprout, it might draw a couple of local cats who would roll around and tear up the edges of the beds. Nothing life-changing, nothing serious. Just a small inconvenience for someone who had caused so much damage. It felt like a small moment of control in a situation where she had been powerless for too long. A secret gesture that would never be traced back to her? It wasn't anger so much as tiredness, a desperate need to leave behind anything that wasn't another painful memory. She picked up several packets without thinking, dropping them into the cart along with the pots. It felt ridiculous, like an inside joke that no one else would ever understand. A few handfuls of seeds that might grow, or might simply disappear into the soil unnoticed. That was the extent of it. No fantasy of ruining his life, no dramatic scheme. Just a final whisper of rebellion after a year of being silenced, ignored, and pushed past her breaking point. Not revenge meant to last, only a fleeting reminder that she existed beyond what he tried to take from her. Later that afternoon, once the pots were loaded into the car and the last boxes sealed, she walked to the edge of the empty garden beds one final time. The soil looked calm and untouched. She tore open the seed packets and let the tiny grains scatter across the surface, letting the wind take some of them. They fell lightly, disappearing into the earth almost instantly. It felt strangely peaceful, like releasing something heavy she no longer needed to carry. When she finished, she didn't linger. She closed the gate behind her and walked away without looking back. The seeds were forgotten even before she reached the car, lost in the whirlwind of everything else happening that day. She drove off believing she had left nothing behind that mattered. Little did she know she had just planted the beginning of something far bigger than she ever imagined. Life moved on. Slowly at first, then all at once. A new home brought quiet mornings instead of fear. A new job gave purpose instead of panic. A new circle of people offered warmth where there had once been only cold distance. Time softened the memories that once felt unbearable, and the wounds that had seemed impossible to heal eventually turned into faint scars. The old house, once the center of every thought, faded into a place she rarely remembered. It became nothing more than a distant echo, buried somewhere so deep that even on difficult days, it no longer rose to the surface. She built routines, found laughter again, learned how to breathe without flinching. There were moments of pride when she realized she had survived what she once believed would break her. The seeds she scattered into the garden on that final day never crossed her mind. They belonged to another lifetime entirely. Years passed without a single thought of that place. The world kept moving, and so did she. The idea of ever returning to that street felt unnecessary, almost absurd. She had no reason to look back. Then one morning, on her way to meet a new client, something familiar tugged at her attention as she turned into a quiet residential area. The houses lined the road in an arrangement she recognized without immediately knowing why. She slowed the car, watching the scenery carefully. The same brick fences, the same narrow sidewalks, the same tall trees leaning over the road like guardians. The familiarity grew stronger with every passing second. She turned down the next street almost by instinct. Her heart gave an unexpected, uneasy thump. And then she saw it, her old home. The sight of it hit with surprising force. For a moment, the world around her fell silent. She parked at the curb, staring through the windshield, not quite believing what she was seeing. But it was undeniably the same house, the windows, the porch, the shape of the yard, all exactly as she remembered. Yet something was different. A large for sale sign stood crookily in the front yard, sun-faded and weather-beaten, as if it had been there longer than it should have been. The lawn was messy and uneven, patches of wild growth scattered everywhere. What had once been a neatly kept yard now looked neglected and chaotic, as if someone had stopped caring a long time ago. And then she saw them cats. Not one or two, but at least 6 sprawled across the grass. One rolled in the dirt near the front steps, another stretched on the walkway, Two more were tangled lazily beneath a bush, half asleep. They looked perfectly at home, as though the yard belonged to them and always had. Their presence was surreal. This was not normal, not natural. It almost looked like a gathering with purpose. A strange mix of confusion and amusement crept into her chest. She watched for a long moment, taking in the absurdity of the scene. Cats lounging like royalty around a house that clearly wanted new ownership. It didn't make sense. The image bordered on comical, like something out of a bizarre neighborhood legend. And yet there it was, undeniable, right before her eyes. Curiosity stirred stronger than caution. She wondered what had happened here. Why the sign looked so permanent? Why the yard was overrun with cats as if drawn there by some invisible force? There had to be a reason, a story, something she didn't know yet. And though she couldn't explain it, she felt an unexpected pull toward the answers waiting just beyond that overgrown lawn. She had no idea what she was about to learn or how deeply it would connect her to the past she thought she had escaped forever. The client recognized the house immediately and shared the story before she even had the chance to ask more than a single question. It turned out the house had become something of a local legend, the kind of bizarre neighborhood tale whispered about with disbelief and fascination. Almost everyone in the area knew what had happened there. People laughed about it now, but there was an edge to their amusement, a blend of shock and pity. The story had unfolded over years, slowly and relentlessly, like a disaster no one could control. The yard, once neat and beautifully maintained, had been overtaken by catnip. Not just a few isolated plants sprouting here and there, but a full and unstoppable invasion. It began subtly, with small patches appearing in places where the garden once bloomed. At first, the owner tried to pull them out by hand, thinking they were weeds. But the more he removed, the faster they seemed to spread. Soon the plants crept across every garden bed, weaving into the lawn, pushing through cracks in the walkway, and even appearing near the foundation of the house. It wasn't contained. It wasn't manageable. It grew like a wild army, rooting deep and wide, fighting back against every attempt to erase it. Neighbors watched in disbelief as the once well-kept yard transformed into something unrecognizable. Summer brought the worst of it. The smell was strong and constant, thick in the air. The scent spread far beyond the property lines, drifting down the block until the entire end of the street smelled like a giant litter box. People walking their dogs crossed to the opposite sidewalk. Children avoided riding bicycles past the house. Anyone driving with the windows down regretted it instantly. And then came the cats, not 2 or 3, but dozens. Cats from every corner of the neighborhood discovered their paradise and claimed it as their own. They lounged on the grass like sunbathers on a beach. They rolled wildly in the catnip plants, sending leaves flying. They stretched across the driveway, blocking cars from entering or leaving. Sometimes they gathered in groups, forming what looked like cat meetings, staring at passers-by with lazy confidence. They climbed onto cars parked nearby, scratched furniture left on the porch, and yowled through the night in clouds of chaotic energy. The yard had become a feline amusement park, and nothing, not fences, not traps, not sprays, kept them away. People joked about the house, but no one wanted to buy it. Real estate agents tried to stage showings, but potential buyers fled at the smell before they even reached the door. Some joked they needed hazmat suits. Others accused the listing of being a prank. Even desperate attempts to advertise it at a major discount failed. The property earned an unofficial nickname around town, the Catnip House, spoken with equal parts humor and horror. The owner had tried everything. Professional landscapers were brought in more than once. They dug up soil by the truckload, ripping out entire sections of the yard. Chemicals were sprayed that killed nearly everything except the catnip. Expensive treatments promised results but delivered nothing. Each time the plants vanished temporarily, they returned stronger, spreading faster, reaching farther. It was as if the roots lived beneath the earth in an indestructible network, waiting to rise again. Years of frustration dragged on. Years of embarrassment and angry arguments with neighbors followed. Complaints were filed with the city, but nothing could legally be done about plants or cats, and eventually the owner gave up. The yard was surrendered to the chaos. Defeated, he placed the house on the market, prepared to sell it for a devastating loss. There were rumors he was leaving the state entirely, all because of a few handfuls of seeds tossed casually into the soil on the day someone walked away believing she was leaving nothing behind. Seeds meant only to be a tiny inconvenience had grown into a disaster more powerful than she could have ever imagined. Sitting in the car, she watched a cat stretch across the porch railing, the sunlight warm on its fur. The animal looked perfectly content, as if nothing in the world could ever trouble it. Its tail twitched lazily, catching the light like a ribbon. The house behind it, once a place that filled her with dread and suffocating memories, now appeared strangely quiet and harmless. It no longer held power over her. Instead, it stood there like a monument to survival, a silent reminder of a life she had escaped and rebuilt. The bitter weight that had once settled heavily on her chest felt unexpectedly light. The sight was peaceful in a way she never expected peace to feel. A sudden wave of guilt washed over her, sharp and uncomfortable. She had never wished for suffering or punishment. Revenge had never been the goal. On the day she left, she was broken, exhausted, desperate to carve out some fragment of control after months of being stripped of it. The seeds were never meant to be anything more than a whisper of rebellion, a symbolic gesture to reclaim something small. She had imagined maybe a few plants pushing through the soil, maybe a couple of neighborhood cats causing mild annoyance, nothing more. A moment of private satisfaction. A final gesture in a chapter she was trying to close. But the truth unfolding before her was undeniable. Those tiny seeds had rooted into something far bigger than she ever intended. The catnip had spread wildly, fearlessly, the way something resilient grows when it finds open space. It consumed the yard, the reputation of the house, and eventually the owner's ability to stay. The revenge had taken on a life of its own, free from her control or expectations. It had become something untamed, something unstoppable, something that continued to grow long after she walked away. There was no triumph in knowing that someone else's life had unraveled because of it. No satisfaction in seeing the for sale sign leaning crooked in the yard or the worn patch of grass where countless frustrated attempts at repair must have taken place. No pleasure in imagining the arguments, the sleepless nights, the embarrassment. All she felt was a quiet, complicated mix of surprise, disbelief, and reluctant remorse. She had not planned for any of this. The destruction was not her intention. She simply wanted to feel like she mattered again, even if only for one fleeting moment. Yet beneath the guilt, there was another feeling, one she could not quite name. It was the understanding that life is unpredictable and consequences do not always follow the paths we expect. A reminder that small choices can ripple outward in ways impossible to foresee. That the tiniest actions, especially the ones made in moments of emotional desperation, can grow into storms with no clear beginning or end. She watched another cat leap from the porch and disappear into the tall grass. The wind rustled through the overgrown plants, carrying a faint scent she could almost recognize. She started the engine, but she did not drive away immediately. She sat there a moment longer, letting the surreal reality settle into the quiet. Sometimes the smallest actions become the biggest storms. And sometimes petty revenge grows roots deeper than anyone ever intended, reaching far beyond the moment it was planted, reshaping everything around it in the most unexpected ways.